Hi, and welcome to the Collector's Edge from Nordic Art Partners. In today's episode, we will talk about the work and the career of Chico da Silva, a Brazilian artist largely forgotten who is now enjoying a significant renaissance in his reputation. Let's get started.
It is with Alex Rotter at 400 million. Selling here at Christie's, $400 million is the bid, and the piece is sold.
We've all heard about it. Sometimes it's front page news. Important works of art are being sold for incredible sums of money. But can you get involved and become a part of the exclusive club yourself? And how do you get started while avoiding buying the wrong things? That's exactly what this podcast is about. This is The Collector's Edge from Nordic Art Partners, a podcast for those of you interested in the mechanics of the art industry, want advice about putting money into art, or simply want to buy something for your walls to beautify your surroundings. Whatever your objectives, it is possible to put money into art wisely, to be considered, thoughtful, and well-informed in your choices and actions. Welcome to the art of collecting, with an eye for curated beauty and practical value.
Hi Nick, welcome.
Hello Jeppe, thank you.
Nicholas Robinson, a contemporary art expert with more than 25 years of experience. Nick has worked in London and was in New York for 20 years and more recently in Copenhagen. He has worked in the auction industry and was a garagist in Manhattan for many years. For the last decade, he has focused on heavily research-based acquisitions for his family portfolio for private high net worth clients, family offices and fine art investment funds. So we're going to talk about Chico da Silva, also just called Chico, I guess, today.
Francisco
Chico
da Silva.
Yeah, just pronounce it as Chico. Is that okay?
That's his how he's commonly known, yes.
Good. So for the last 12 months, it's been a quite crazy ride following him. And just to try to understand it, could we maybe just take a step back and ask ourselves the question, who is Chico da Silva?
Okay, well, Chico da Silva was a Brazilian artist who came to prominence in the 1960s. The son of a Peruvian Indian and Brazilian woman, born. There are some doubts as to his birth date, but the common consensus is around 1910. And he died in 1985, largely in obscurity and probably destitution. So his heyday, if you like, was in the 1960s, somewhat in the 1970s, but he was working, records show he was working as early as the 1940s.
Makes sense. So that's who he is, and he's no longer with us. But it also came to our attention like 12 months ago, right? Why haven't we heard so much about him before?
It's difficult to say. I mean, I think that the art world, the art market, is always on the lookout for interesting things from history that have been overlooked for whatever reason. And you know, there are certain attitudes in the art world now that embrace a much wider church, a much broader church of practices, also from different ethnicities, geographical areas that maybe have not previously been included in the traditional canon of art history. So there's appeal to discover new things, and there's appeal to discover new things that already have some kind of compelling story attached to them. But of course, they also have to be they have to be qualitatively interesting. They have to be good art, interesting art, original, unique art that stands up by itself. And then, of course, if you have these other narratives and compelling information attached to these artists, then there starts to be a bigger picture that becomes interesting.
Thanks, Nick. So the last 12 months have been really good for Chico, I guess we could say. Quiet by museums, had a lot of good exhibition. But could we again take a step back and try to describe his works and these Amazon creatures?
His work focuses on the sort of myths and legends of Amazonian culture. So we see a lot of fictitious, fantastical creatures related to life in the Amazon, life in the rainforest. We see birds, we see fish, we see the food chain in nature. These works were often executed on somewhat cheap materials, but he was introduced to gouache and tempera by a Swiss artist who was traveling in Brazil. And this is another sort of side note, which maybe is a little interesting to note. But when he was discovered by this Swiss gentleman, Chablot was his name, Chablot championed his work and assisted Chico in getting into some exhibition, some galleries in Brazil, some opportunities to exhibit his work in the West. And this culminated in Chico representing Brazil in the 1966 Venice Biennale, for which he was given a special mention, a special commendation. So in an international context, and I guess we joke about the Biennale, calling it the Olympics of the art world, but he garnered genuine international attention in this forum in 1966. So anyway, we have this very exotic language of creatures. We have the works executed in this sort of indigenous, sort of naive style, but we have the work executed in this very sort of meticulous, traditionally Western medium, gouache and tempera. Yeah.
Okay, so they're deeply rooted in the Amazon.
They are. I mean, they look very exotic. Yeah. They look like a fantastic array of creatures chasing and eating other creatures.
Okay, and does the painting tell us a story?
Well, I mean,
you said something about the food chain.
Yeah, I mean, they don't tell a literal story, but it's, in Brazil and presumably in life in the Amazon, it's a very lush, exotic. I mean, I think I have to choose my words carefully, because I also look at this kind of culture through the lens of my own experience. And when Chablot was traveling in Brazil, and when he was bringing Chico to prominence, he was describing him as this sort of local Indian, this naive painter, and I think that we can't ignore the fact that there's a certain sort of colonialism at play here with the championing of this work, especially in the 1960s, especially in the way it was talked about and presented to Western audiences. And when we look at it today, we look at it as almost a new category of art being brought into the mainstream art market. And so, we look at it with the eyes that are influenced by the things that we've grown up seeing, the things that we're most familiar with in museums and galleries. But we have to try and, I don't know, be careful of this more patronizing aspect, I suppose.
Okay, so the works are, I guess, deeply rooted in Chico's own visual culture, of course. I suppose it's an aesthetic we are a bit unfamiliar with. Also, when we look at the works, what are we most looking for? Are there any or some specific features that his best works have in common? And is this what the market's recognizing?
Yes, there are some recurring motifs. We see lots of birds, fantastic birds with very sharp beaks, very aggressive talons, often chasing after smaller birds or fish. We see a lot of fish motifs, large fish with wide open mouths, with very sharp teeth, most often chasing, consuming other fish insects, etc., etc. These depictions are always stylized, and I think not of any specific kind of fish, so they're not literal. And then we see more completely made-up creatures, where we see fantastical sort of dragons and lizards and these kinds of things. But often the way these animals are rendered, the kinds of decorative patterns we see on their bodies, the way they open mouths and the teeth are depicted, and the sort of wide-eyed look that they have, these often, from one painting to another, these creatures all have these kinds of features in common. And Chico's work went through various stages. I mean, his works that are perhaps now becoming a little more prized are works that were executed in gouache on paper throughout the 1960s, and most often mounted on wood. And these have a certain kind of pictorial space. There's a sort of a swirling, stippled, painterly patterns around the figures. There's quite a lot of breathing room around the figures themselves. Often they're sort of surrounding a tree where they're trying to eat things from the tree or eat each other. And this is a sort of a category of work that's emerging as something that's people are really looking to. And then later in the 1960s and throughout the 1970s, the paintings became much more colorful, painted on canvas instead of paper, and often much more vibrant colors, much brighter, solid-colored backgrounds. So they have a slightly different characteristic stylistically as they evolved.
So over the last 12 months or so, or maybe going back a bit farther than that, we have been buying quite a significant number of works by Chico, learning as we go to some extent. How do you advise someone about Chico's works, especially since many will never have seen something like this before?
Well, I mean, we buy them because we like them. We respond very strongly to them, and we see the innate quality in them, I think. But I think it would be disingenuous to say that we buy them just because we love them. There's lots of things in the world that look great, that have interesting properties that one could spend money on. But we don't and can't go out and buy everything. So when we look at certain things, we try and understand other criteria that the market is showing us. And of course, when you have an artist who's, you could say that Chico is a historic artist who's been rediscovered, but essentially the market for Chico that we have now is a new market for all intents and purposes. It's one that did not exist before. His work, is now regularly trading at auction. And that's because his work is gained some traction, it's gained a following, and it's only gained a following because there are a number of prominent galleries that have now been taking up the mantle to push Chico's work into a mainstream consciousness. So we have David Kordansky, who of course is a very reputable gallery based primarily in Los Angeles, but has a gallery in New York. The first major Chico show, if you like, in a commercial sense, was in his gallery in New York. He had previously taken one or two paintings to the art fairs in the autumn of 2023. And then the gallery exhibition was the first sort of major thing that started to propel attention to a new level. Further to that, there have been a few isolated paintings come up at auction, some of which have done quite well, some of which have a little bit fallen between the cracks just because the appetite is not so evolved or developed yet for his work. Subsequently, there's been an exhibition by a Belgian dealer who had a solo booth of Chico's work that was very well presented with works of very high quality at Art Genève in Geneva. And then latterly, there's been an exhibition at Massimo De Carlo, who has shown Chico's works in his Paris space. And the last, most recent exhibition is with a gallery called Bank, which is a very nice Basel exhibiting gallery based in Shanghai. And they've also done a Chico da Silva exhibition. So we look at this cross-section of exhibiting galleries, and we see a deep interest and a deep appetite across multiple major markets. In the Americas, with Kordansky, he has a high profile and a big reach. Massimo De Carlo in Europe is a big gallery with a powerful brand, if you will, and a gravitas to also extend the reach and build a market. And then, the gallery in Shanghai is less noted and less established than those two that I've mentioned, but also a good place, and something that builds credibility, builds awareness, and presumably they also have a collecting reach in Asia. So when you see this depth of collecting across these markets, plus a burgeoning awareness, even in Sao Paulo, which is the sort of center of the Chico market in Brazil, then you can say that, it's not just a small isolated pocket of interest, it's a deep, wide interest globally.
Okay, but you can also easily say that there's no doubt that Chico have a quite unique position and have had for many years in Brazilian art history. So, it's also quite interesting that from 12 months ago, there was no exhibition in a global scale of Chico, and now I guess he is all over the place, or many places anyway. Do you see his legacy influence the global contemporary artists in the market we have right now?
I think it's a bit too soon to say. We can't. There's information, visual information everywhere these days, and I suppose things don't get made in a vacuum, and the more things that artists see and absorb, the more likely they are to somehow recycle those things consciously or unconsciously. I don't see, Chico-like work sort of populating the market, but we've seen in the recent past figurative work that's shown very lush, exotic landscape. Obviously, there's a strong interest in nature, what with the climate problems that we've had, and that we continue to have, and that somehow remain unaddressed. I think obviously nature has always been a big inspiration for artists, going back hundreds of years. We see the natural sublime in Romanticism, in German art and British art, landscape art in the 18th and 19th centuries. We see strong feelings of nature, the power of nature even in abstract expressionist painters. I think it's always been there. So yeah, Chico's work is a very distinctive body of work that was consistent over 20, 30 years. And there's a number of paintings, obviously, that are out there that are now finding their way, being sort of recycled into the market. Obviously, when an artist is rediscovered and experiences a building market where the prices are, vastly more than they were only a relatively short time ago, then you have sellers who are kind of keen to take their opportunity, if you like, to get money that previously was impossible for them to think that they could get.
Yeah. Well, you said that he had been exhibiting in Venice Biennale in 66, so it's almost 60 years ago.
Yes.
Is he represented by other institutions?
Yes. His work is in a number of very prominent museums. There was a very interesting survey exhibition last year in the Pinacoteca in Sao Paulo. And important works by Chico have been acquired by the Tate, by the Guggenheim, and the Pompidou. And just last month, the Pompidou acquired two more gouaches. And this, again, these are of that 60s type that I referred to earlier, gouache on paper, mounted on a wooden board. So, of course, his works now are being quite hungrily absorbed into these powerful Western institutions, and that only helps to substantiate a sense of confidence in the work.
So in November last year, a new auction record for Chico's work was hammered at Sotheby's in New York on the 14th November, actually, for $330,000. New record. If we see in a broader context of buying, collecting art, how does Chico's work stand in terms of value appreciation and potential in the market right now?
Well, I mean, I think that was in many markets, and the art market is no exception. Timing is key, and this was a sort of a perfect synergy of factors, including the contemporaneous Kordansky show. Kordansky is an important gallery with a fantastic roster of artists and a real track record in identifying and building markets for interesting things. And this particular painting that was sold for this price was a painting that had been exhibited at the Venice Biennale. So it was absolutely the most sort of prestigious work by Chico that could have come to the market at this time. And it was in the same collection, an important collection in Chicago, and it had been in the same collection since 1966. So, it was, not only was it the best example of Chico's work that could have been offered for sale, it was also completely fresh to the market and a very maybe unique opportunity to acquire this seminal example of Chico's work. So that's one thing. Not only that, it was a very large painting, and these large paintings, obviously, if a painting is very big, it's worth more than if it's very small. But these very large paintings are relatively rare. We see lots of works by Chico that are 60, 70, 80, even 90 centimeters, maybe a little bit less in this sort of 1 meter size, but lots of paintings that are 60, 70 centimeters in size. And typically these galleries that I've mentioned are selling these paintings for somewhere around $50,000, $60,000 euros. That's the market price. When they have sold at auction, they've been selling, anywhere from sort of $30,000 to $70,000. So, a much bigger plus or minus range relative to this quite strict pricing structure that, these galleries independently, collectively, I think independently have determined. And I think, they're all sticking to this price that Kordansky has set, because, the key to building a market is to consistently adhere to a price, and to ensure that they don't go out into the world unless that's the price. If the works are vetted carefully for condition and authenticity, then I think they're good things to buy. I think it's possible to buy them for less. If you scour auctions, especially auctions in Brazil, but of course then you have to dealing with a business in Brazil, authentication, who's been responsible for that, all of these kinds of things. Are you able to check out the condition? Probably not. It's a little bit more of a leap of faith. So when you buy for let's say the market premium price from Kordansky or Massimo De Carlo, for instance, you're presumably buying the safety of all of those things already having been done for you.
Yeah. Also because we have seen some fake works out there.
Yeah, we've seen some fake works. And, there's a slightly different set of criteria, I suppose, that we apply to the term fakes, at least in this particular context. There are some overt forgeries where people are attempting to copy a Chico type work or make something ostensibly in his style that they then try and pass off as an authentic Chico da Silva painting. But there are also other works sort of related to Chico and his production made in the region at the time, where there was a kind of a different attitude towards fakes. Obviously, we're not proposing that similar or related works are the same or equivalent to Chico's paintings, but just to sort of dive into the nuance of this question, when Chico was in his pomp in the late 60s and 70s, he was successful, very commercially successful, selling paintings to the collecting classes of Brazil. And he had a studio, a production facility that was making paintings. There's the exhibition at the Pinacoteca in Sao Paulo addressed this. They call it the Pirambu School. And there were, I think, 4 or 5 artists that constituted the members of his studio. And each of them made different contributions to the evolution of Chico's style. Some of them painted at his direction. Some of them innovated additions to the style, to the repertoire of motifs that were being painted, and so now you're able to sort of pass some works from others as to whose hand is involved in making them. Ultimately, Chico's signature was applied to these paintings because they were paintings made in his studio. But this is simply akin to old master studio guild systems, whereby you would have a master who was responsible for producing the painting and was, ultimately the author of the painting, but where you might have, let's say, Rembrandt responsible for painting the face, the eyes, the hands, the most expressive components of a painting. You would have other journeyman painters that specialized in different elements of painting. You would have somebody who would be a specialist in painting drapery of the clothes, or the food and the tablecloth, or the landscape, or the physical environment behind the people. All of these tasks were divided up in a division of labor according to different specializations. And it's of course not quite the same in Chico's studio, but there are some parallels to this. And Chico and his colleagues, they also celebrated the communal nature of making these paintings. So what to them was a certain kind of cooperative collaboration, this sort of collegial enthusiasm with which they were making these paintings. In the 70s, for instance, Chablot made some unfortunate comments which cast aspersions on authenticity of Chico's work, because he was, I don't know his motives for doing this, but his comments at least caused Chico a great deal of despair, and were a significant catalyst for an already deteriorating mental and emotional state and a serious dependency on alcohol. So when we look at Chico's paintings and we question their authenticity, there are certain things you have to bear in mind. There are certain elements of the works you need to interrogate. But if you do this, mindful of these points that I've made, then you can arrive at the right conclusion. But I think if you are conscious of those things and you take care of making sure those criteria are properly satisfied, then buying work is a sound thing. I mean, certainly the museum representation is something that's continuing and is looking very strong, and probably there'll be some institutional exhibitions that we can look forward to, hopefully in interesting Western institutions that help to cement Chico's place and his reputation amongst these sort of great artists of the 20th century. The interesting thing about his work, I think, his work was highly praised by André Malraux in the 1960s. That's a sort of interesting point to make. There's always artists who are maybe a little bit of an outlier. I mean, the prevailing trends in the 1960s, you can look at pop art, you can look at minimalism art, you can look at the infancy of conceptual art, post-minimal conceptual art. Chico does not fit into any of those boxes. His work is much more in this expressive trajectory. You can look at artists in the early 20th century, like Henri Rousseau, who was known as Le Douanier, or the customs officer. He was a self-taught artist who made these very exotic scenes, and his work was adored by the avant-garde. Picasso thought his work was spectacular. The surrealists thought his work was spectacular, and he was a big inspiration to them. And, so Chico, as an artist who plows this very singular furrow for himself, is an artist who, because of these unique qualities, is able to appeal in a very broad way.
Thanks, Nick. Some interesting points of reference. Maybe also people listening here would be interesting to dive a bit more into his works. First thing, we'd maybe see if it's something they like to look at, these creatures, Amazon creatures. But what can you do if you want a deep dive into the Chico works? What would you recommend?
Well, I mean, I think that, like most people, when you're looking to try and learn something new, you look online and you search and you see what comes up. And I think that if you're interested in seeing a number of examples of the work and then reading some contextual information about it, then look at Kordansky's site, look at Massimo De Carlo's site, and you can read the sort of potted history that these galleries have put together. There's a couple of really great galleries in Brazil that have got interesting texts about the artists. If you look at, there's a gallery called Galatea, there's a gallery called Gomide. All of these galleries have got information that you can absorb if you wish to see some. And then, you'll find information related to his institutional shows, the Pinacoteca. You can search online in the museums I've mentioned, Pompidou, Tate, Guggenheim. They'll all record the acquisitions and have probably some information about the work. If you're interested in buying work, then you can look on Artsy, which is the leading online marketplace for art, for modern and contemporary art, and you'll see a number of examples there. You can inquire after them. You'll find maybe there's not so much available, and you'll find that they're typically $50,000-$60,000. We carry an inventory of works. If you're interested in finding more out about what we have, then you're welcome to reach out to us too, right?
Yeah, of course. And are we finished buying Chico works?
Probably not. I think that we're art dealers, of course. So we always have to be opportunistic a little about our acquisition price. It's getting much harder to find them. The ones that are coming our way are fewer and farther between, and typically more expensive. But I think, all being well, we'll continue to buy Chico works, and we'll continue to encourage people to look seriously at them as a really interesting thing to acquire.
Thank you for the conversation, Nick, and thank you for letting us into the world of Chico.
Yeah, it's an interesting world. You should dive into it, although you should avoid the sharp teeth of the fish when you're in there.
Makes sense. Well, if you have any question, if you want to buy or sell some art, you're always welcome to contact me at jeppe@nordicartpartners.com. And thank you for this time.